Let's start with a little exercise. Think about the last time you sat down to do something important. Something you genuinely wanted to do, or genuinely needed to do. Maybe it was a work project. Maybe it was a phone call you'd been avoiding for 2 weeks. And instead, you reorganized your desk. Or watched 4 hours of something you don't even remember. Or started 6 other tasks, finished none of them, and ended the day feeling like a failure who somehow stayed busy the entire time. If that landed, this video is for you. And if you're a therapist watching this to get better tools for your ADHD clients, welcome. Stay through, because we're going to get clinical, practical, and leave nobody without something actionable. Today we're doing a full, honest deep dive into ADHD and executive function. What it actually is. Why it works the way it does. What's happening in the brain. And most importantly, what you can actually do about it, today, with the brain you have right now. This is not a, "Have you tried a planner?" video. We are going way deeper than that. Let's start at the beginning, because there is an enormous amount of misinformation about what ADHD actually is, and misunderstanding the thing you're dealing with makes it almost impossible to deal with it effectively. ADHD stands for Attention Deficit Hyperactivity Disorder, which is, frankly, a terrible name for it. Because the core issue is not a deficit of attention. People with ADHD often have a surplus of attention, it just doesn't always go where they want it to go, when they want it to go there. A better way to understand it, ADHD is a disorder of attention regulation, of executive function, of the brain's ability to manage itself. There are 3 presentations. Inattentive type, characterized by difficulty sustaining focus, following through on tasks, staying organized, and holding information in working memory. This presentation is chronically underdiagnosed, especially in women and girls, because it doesn't look disruptive from the outside. It just looks like someone who's spacey, or forgetful, or not trying hard enough. Hyperactive-impulsive type is more externally visible, fidgeting, interrupting, difficulty staying seated, acting before thinking. This is the presentation most people picture when they hear ADHD. And combined type, which includes symptoms from both. This is actually the most common diagnosis. Here's what all 3 share. They are not a willpower problem. They are not a character flaw. ADHD is a neurodevelopmental condition rooted in differences in brain structure and function, particularly in the prefrontal cortex and the dopamine and norepinephrine systems. It is real, it is biological, and it is one of the most well-researched conditions in all of psychiatry. If you've spent years telling yourself you're lazy or broken, you have been working against a neurological headwind that most people around you have never experienced. The fact that you're still standing is not a small thing. Let's talk about the ADHD iceberg, because what most people see is just the surface. Above the waterline, the visible stuff. Forgetting things. Missing deadlines. Losing items. Difficulty sitting still. Below the waterline, and this is the part that actually runs the show, is everything else. The time blindness. The emotional dysregulation. The shame. The rejection sensitivity. The exhaustion from masking. The way a mildly critical comment can derail your entire day. Most ADHD treatment addresses what's above the waterline, which helps. But if you're not also working on what's underneath, the emotional and psychological weight of living in a neurotypical world with an ADHD brain, you're only getting half the picture. Understanding your own brain is not a luxury. It is essential. Executive function is the engine of everything we're talking about. It's a set of mental processes that live primarily in the prefrontal cortex, handling planning, decision-making, impulse control, emotional regulation, and the ability to act toward future goals. Think of it as your brain's CEO. In people with ADHD, this CEO has a complicated relationship with the job. Not because of a lack of intelligence, many people with ADHD are extraordinarily intelligent, but because the neurological infrastructure that supports executive function operates differently. The dopamine that's supposed to motivate action toward future rewards doesn't always show up on command. There are 8 executive functions worth knowing by name. Working memory, your ability to hold information in mind and work with it in real time. When this is impaired, you walk into a room and forget why. You lose your train of thought mid-sentence. Cognitive flexibility, the ability to shift between tasks and adjust when plans change. When this is impaired, transitions become agonizing. Unexpected changes feel catastrophic. Inhibition, the ability to pause before acting. To resist the impulse that's screaming right now in favor of what actually serves you. This is the one that gets people with ADHD into the most visible social trouble. Emotional regulation, the ability to manage emotional responses proportionally. People with ADHD often feel emotions more intensely, because the same prefrontal cortex that regulates impulse also regulates emotional reactivity. Planning and organization, breaking a goal into steps, sequencing tasks in order. This is where the "just make a to-do list" advice falls apart. For someone with impaired planning function, write a business proposal, and buy milk look roughly equivalent on a list. Time management, and this is where we need to talk about time blindness. Most neurotypical brains have a relatively stable sense of time passing. ADHD brains often experience time as 2 categories, now and not now. Things that are imminent feel real. Things in the future have a vagueness that makes it genuinely hard to act on them. This is why deadlines only become real at the last minute. It's not procrastination as a character flaw. It's a different relationship with time. Task initiation, the ability to start. For an ADHD brain, initiation requires a firing of dopamine that doesn't reliably happen on command. You need interest, challenge, novelty, urgency, or passion to access the neurological fuel that gets the engine running. Without one of those elements, starting can feel like trying to push a car uphill without knowing where the ignition is. Self-monitoring, the ability to evaluate your own behavior in real time. To notice when you've gone off track before it's too late to course correct. 8 functions. All of them operating on a more complicated circuit in an ADHD brain. This is not a willpower problem. This is neuroscience. You cannot understand ADHD without understanding dopamine. Dopamine is a neurotransmitter that plays a central role in motivation, reward, and attention. It's often called a feel-good chemical, but more accurately, it's the chemical that says, that thing is worth pursuing. In ADHD brains, the dopamine system is dysregulated. There are typically fewer dopamine receptors, and dopamine is cleared from the synapse faster than it should be. The motivational signal is weaker and more dependent on immediate, high-stimulation rewards. This is why an ADHD person can spend 8 hours hyperfocusing on something intensely interesting, but cannot sustain 20 minutes on something important but boring. The interesting thing is flooding the dopamine system. The boring thing isn't. The ADHD brain isn't choosing the fun thing over the important thing because of moral failure. It is responding to what its neurological system can actually access fuel for. Understanding your dopamine system gives you power. Because instead of fighting your brain, you can start working with it. You can engineer novelty into boring tasks. You can create external urgency when internal urgency isn't available. More on how in just a moment. Now let's talk about rejection sensitivity dysphoria, because this is one of the least discussed and most impactful aspects of ADHD. Rejection sensitivity dysphoria, or RSD, is an extreme emotional sensitivity to perceived rejection, criticism, failure, or disappointing someone. And perceived is the key word. RSD doesn't require actual rejection. The fear of possible rejection can be just as activating. Research suggests RSD is present in the vast majority of people with ADHD. Dr. William Dodson describes it as one of the most impairing aspects of ADHD for many adults. What does RSD look like in real life? It looks like avoiding projects you care deeply about because if you try and fail, the pain will be unbearable. It looks like reading a slightly flat text and spending the next 4 hours convinced someone hates you. It looks like people-pleasing to exhausting extremes. It looks like an inner critic that never shuts up, replaying every social interaction for evidence of what you did wrong. RSD is painful. And it is one of the main reasons ADHD has such high comorbidity with anxiety and depression, not because ADHD causes anxiety directly, but because living in chronic fear of rejection, chronic shame about your executive function, and chronic self-criticism is, over time, depressing. This is not who you are. This is a feature of how your nervous system has adapted. It is workable. It is healable. But it requires compassion, not more pressure. Emotional dysregulation in ADHD doesn't just mean feeling things strongly. It means the regulatory circuitry that typically buffers emotion, that creates a pause between feeling and reaction, is less reliable. So you don't just feel frustrated. You feel flooded. And from that flooded place, reflection isn't available. Perspective isn't available. Nuance isn't available. The cycle typically looks like this. Something triggers an emotional response, which floods the system, which impairs executive function, which leads to impulsive behavior or shutdown, which leads to shame, which triggers more dysregulation. Round and round. This is why sleep, nutrition, movement, and sensory input aren't wellness extras for ADHD brains, they are neurological necessities. A regulated ADHD brain can do remarkable things. A dysregulated one is working with essentially no executive function at all. Breaking the cycle requires interrupting it at multiple points, before the flood when possible, and with self-compassion after. Now let's get into actual tools. Practical, research-backed approaches that work for ADHD brains. No single tool works for every ADHD brain. Your job is not to find the one perfect system, it is to build a flexible toolkit you can pull from depending on the day, the task, and the state of your nervous system. The first tool is body doubling. This is one of the most reliably effective and chronically underused strategies for ADHD. Body doubling simply means working in the presence of another person, even if they're not doing the same task, even if you're not talking, even if they're on the other side of a video call. The presence of another person activates social accountability circuitry in the brain that provides just enough external structure to support task initiation. For people who find it almost impossible to work alone but can suddenly focus in a coffee shop, this is exactly why. Use virtual co-working sessions, a study partner, or a "study with me" video. The results are often immediate. The second tool is external time anchoring. ADHD time blindness is combated by external time cues, not internal ones. If you tell yourself, "I'll work on this for a while," your brain has no anchor. A timer for 20 minutes creates a now out of something that felt like vague future. Visible clocks, time timers, and calendar blocks all serve this function. Stop relying on internal time sense. Build an external time environment instead. The third tool is the dopamine, a personalized list of activities that reliably activate your dopamine system without destroying your day. Divide it into categories: appetizers, quick 2 to 5 minute dopamine hits you can use before a hard task, like upbeat music, a short walk, or a funny video. main courses, more substantial rewards for after a work session. And side dishes, ambient sources that run in the background while you work, like instrumental music or white noise. The reason this matters: ADHD brains will seek dopamine. Always. The question is whether you have a curated list ready, or whether your unsupervised dopamine-seeking brain gets to choose. Spoiler: unsupervised usually looks like 3 hours of social media and a shame spiral. Build your dopamine when you're regulated. Use it when you're not. The fourth tool is urge surfing. Urge surfing is a mindfulness-based technique that is extraordinarily useful for ADHD impulsivity. An urge, like a wave, rises in intensity, peaks, and then naturally subsides, if you don't act on it and don't fight it. You simply observe it. In practice, I'm noticing the urge to open Instagram right now. I'm going to breathe and watch it for 60 seconds. Often, that's all it takes to let the peak pass. This creates a pause between impulse and action. And that pause is the entire game with executive function. The fifth tool is environmental design. Your environment is essentially part of your executive function system. If your environment is chaotic, full of friction between you and the tasks you need to do, it is working against your brain. If it cues you toward the right behaviors and removes friction, it is doing executive function work for you. Put your supplements next to your coffee maker. Put your gym bag by the door the night before. Close tabs before you end a work session. Declutter your workspace before a hard task because visual chaos competes directly for ADHD attention. You are not going to out-willpower a bad environment. Design the environment to support the behavior. The sixth tool is habit stacking from the Atomic Habits framework. Attaching a new habit to an existing reliable one offloads the initiation problem onto an already running system. After I pour my morning coffee, I will write for 10 minutes, requires far less executive function than I should write more. Make desired behaviors obvious, easy, and immediately rewarding. Make undesired behaviors invisible and hard. This isn't motivational advice, it's system design, and it's one of the most ADHD-compatible behavior change models available. The seventh tool is the inner critic versus inner coach practice. People with ADHD carry significantly more negative self-talk than their neurotypical peers. The inner critic, "You always do this, what is wrong with you, other people can just sit down and do it," is often not your voice at all. It is a composite of every person who ever communicated that you were failing at something that should be easy. The inner coach sounds like, "This is hard for your brain, and that's real. What's the next smallest step?" The goal is not to silence the critic by force. It is to recognize it, name it, and consciously choose the coach's voice instead. This is a practice. It requires repetition. And it is one of the most important long-term interventions for ADHD self-worth. A quick word on productivity for ADHD brains, because most productivity advice was designed by and for neurotypical people and actively fails ADHD brains. Instead of a full to-do list, try identifying one, just one, most important thing each day. Do it first, before anything reactive. This removes the paralysis of choosing between 15 things, which is itself a significant executive function drain. Use time blocking with intentional transition time between tasks. ADHD brains need buffer time to cognitively shift between contexts. Back-to-back scheduling leads to chronic lateness and dysregulation. And use accountability structures. Deadlines, check-ins, accountability partners, and public commitments create external urgency that the ADHD brain can access when internal urgency is absent. This is not cheating. This is knowing how your brain works and designing accordingly. Self-care for ADHD is not optional. It is medicine. Sleep deprivation directly impairs prefrontal cortex function, which means poor sleep makes executive function worse, emotional regulation worse, and RSD worse. Protect sleep as a non-negotiable pillar of ADHD management. Cardiovascular exercise has been shown to improve dopamine and norepinephrine availability in the prefrontal cortex for hours afterward. For many people, it is as effective as low-dose stimulant medication. It is free. Use it. Nutrition and blood sugar stability matter more for ADHD brains than most people realize. Dopamine synthesis requires adequate protein. Blood sugar crashes create dysregulation cascades that hit executive function hard. Meals with adequate protein and fat, eaten at regular intervals, are executive function support. And your daily DOSE, dopamine, oxytocin, serotonin, and endorphins, are all actionable. Managing your ADHD means actively tending to these neurochemical systems rather than waiting for them to regulate themselves. For therapists watching, here is a brief clinical framework. Effective ADHD therapy addresses the whole system: neurological, behavioral, emotional, and relational. Psychoeducation should be woven throughout the work, not delivered once at intake. Clients often need to hear concepts multiple times from multiple angles before they integrate. Skills work should be collaborative and experimental. What works for one ADHD client will not work for another. Help the client identify which of their challenges map to which executive functions, then experiment with tools together. The failure of a strategy is information, not evidence of the client's inadequacy. Emotional work should address RSD, shame, and the internalized negative identity explicitly. Many ADHD adults have never had someone name and validate what it feels like to live in their nervous system. That naming alone can be profoundly therapeutic. The ADHD Iceberg is a particularly powerful visual for sessions. It externalizes the hidden dimensions of ADHD and often produces immediate emotional relief for clients who have spent years wondering why they're like this. And notice how ADHD shows up in the therapeutic relationship itself. Missed sessions, difficulty preparing, emotional reactivity in session, these are not resistances. They are the work. I want to say something directly before I tell you about the resource I've built. If you have been living with ADHD and treating it as a personal failing, you have been navigating a world that was not designed for your brain, without a map, largely without support, and often without even the language to explain what was happening inside you. The work ahead is not about becoming a different person. It is about learning to work with the remarkable, frustrating, creative, sensitive, intense brain you have. I've built a comprehensive resource bundle specifically for this, and it's available on my PayHip store. The link is in the description. The ADHD and Executive Function Resources Bundle includes an ADHD cheat sheet, an executive function cheat sheet, and the ADHD Iceberg visual. It includes a full breakdown of all 8 executive functions, a dedicated rejection sensitivity dysphoria 101 guide, and a resource on ADHD and RSD together, because that intersection deserves its own focused education. It includes an Atomic Habits cheat sheet, a dopamine template, an ADHD daily planner, and a productivity methods guide. The cycle of emotional regulation. A resource on regulated versus dysregulated ADHD. Your daily DOSE guide so you understand the neurochemical landscape you're working in. Urge surfing for managing unwanted behaviors. Managing ADHD overwhelm. An inner critic versus inner coach guide. A negative self-talk tracker. 6 tools for increasing self-worth. Mantras for self-empowerment with ADHD. And ADHD self-care bingo, because sometimes the path forward includes a little gentleness and play. This bundle was built by someone who understands ADHD clinically and takes it seriously. It is practical, accessible, and designed to actually be used. The link is in the description. Whether you grab it for yourself or you're a therapist building out your client resource library, it's the place to start. Here's what I want you to take with you. ADHD is not a moral failing. It is a brain difference with a specific neurological profile, and it is better understood now than ever before. You are not too much. You are not broken. You are not lazy. Build your toolkit. Design your environment. Tend to your nervous system. Practice the inner coach. And on the days it all falls apart, because some days it will, return to self-compassion instead of self-attack. You are not starting over. You are continuing. And that matters. If this resonated, share it with someone who's been struggling and doesn't know why. With a parent trying to understand their kid. With a therapist who needs better language for this work. Subscribe for more emotional intelligence and mental health content every week. And grab the bundle in the description if you want the full toolkit in your hands. Until next time, you are not your diagnosis. You are so much more than that.